A person once said to me that I became the happiest when I stopped expecting people to understand me, and I couldn't agree more. I have seen smart minds in loneliness just because of this. And the truth is, the intelligent are not really seeking loneliness, but are trying to avoid the fuss created by fools. In a world that constantly demands explanation, those who think deeply often choose silence, not out of arrogance, but out of self-preservation. They have realized that clarifying themselves to everyone is exhausting, and sometimes pointless. In this video, I will be discussing that very thing through the eyes of Søren Kierkegaard, exploring why intelligent people have stopped explaining themselves, and why this has led them to stop preaching for truth. So, let's get into it. Imagine trying to make someone understand a belief or feeling that is deeply personal. You provide all the reasoning and details, but they still don't connect with it. Kierkegaard observed that intellectual explanation can only take us so far. While facts and logical analysis can make the what of a situation clear, they fail to touch the inner dimensions of a person's experience, the who and the why. In concluding Unscientific Postscript, he argued that truth is not something we merely understand. It is something we must live and commit to personally. Beyond a certain depth of experience, attempting to rationalize our convictions becomes futile. One can describe every step of a feeling or a decision, yet another person may still remain untouched by it. Kierkegaard also warned that an overly objective stance can be a barrier to true fulfillment. He wrote that eternal happiness belongs only to the impassioned, infinitely interested subject. In other words, detached reasoning cannot substitute for genuine inward engagement. You can collect facts about faith, love, or purpose, but without personal involvement, knowledge remains empty. To illustrate, consider how we try to explain devotion or love. Asking, "Why are you so committed to this cause?" Or, "Why do you love them?" can never fully capture the depth of personal experience. It's similar to describing the taste of chocolate to someone who has never had it. Words can convey information, but they cannot replicate the experience itself. Several points become clear from Kierkegaard's reflections. Facts can inform the mind, but they cannot generate authentic belief or feeling. Attempting to rationalize profound personal convictions risks misrepresenting lived experience. True understanding often comes not from explanation, but from direct engagement or inner transformation. For Kierkegaard, asking someone to justify their inward commitment with reasons is a category error. Beyond the realm of objective knowledge, there must be a leap, a move into personal, subjective understanding. Explanation has value only until it encounters the limits of lived reality, beyond which only commitment and experience can guide us. Being truly understood by others, especially by the masses, carries a hidden price. Kierkegaard cautioned that bending oneself to public comprehension often comes at the expense of individuality. To make your inner life accessible, you may have to simplify it, omit nuances, or even mask parts of yourself. In essence, communicating fully to the crowd often requires dumbing down the complexity that makes you unique. He famously declared, "The crowd is untruth," critiquing how society pressures people to package themselves for public approval. The crowd values clarity and immediacy over depth, forcing subtlety into a format it can digest. For someone intelligent or reflective, this creates a stark choice: reveal the full truth and risk alienation, or reshape it to meet common expectations. The consequences of adjusting yourself fall almost entirely on the individual. Consider the cost of translating a complex idea into a slogan. You lose layers of meaning. Avoiding honest expression to keep others comfortable distorts the message. Suppressing inner insights to conform socially chips away at inward richness. Kierkegaard argued that the more singular and inward a person is, the greater the price for being understood. Public opinion, he said, in the present age, is an abstract force without coherence or soul. It repulses the individual instead of coming to his help. Those who resist it may be ignored. Those who bow to it betray their inner truth. A concrete example makes this clear. An artist pours decades of subtle emotion into a song. If she tries to explain it in simplified, popular terms, its depth diminishes. Altering the melody or lyrics for mass appeal produces a version the public enjoys, but the original essence is lost. The burden falls entirely on the artist. The audience experiences the benefit without sacrifice. Kierkegaard also observed that leaders who court public approval often show contempt for individuality. Alone, they dismiss a single voice. In the presence of thousands, they defer. To him, this was a manifestation of untruth. Every person is singular, and surrendering to the crowd is a betrayal of that uniqueness. To gain widespread understanding, an individual often must reduce complex thoughts to broad generalizations, losing subtlety, censor or reshape aspects of themselves to avoid misinterpretation, prioritize a public persona over inward depth. The cost is rarely shared. Those who maintain their inward richness pay the price of being misunderstood or overlooked. The deeper and more singular a person is, the higher the price of being understood by many. For intelligent minds, this explains why they often withdraw from explaining themselves. They refuse the self-erasure required to be superficially comprehended. Nuance, the ability to hold subtle distinctions and acknowledge complexity, often makes communication more difficult than we expect. Kierkegaard saw life's truths as inherently paradoxical, resisting tidy, systematic explanations. Yet many people find subtlety uncomfortable. Why? Because it challenges both the desire for simplicity and the avoidance of responsibility. Nuanced ideas require engagement, reflection, and personal choice, rather than passive agreement. They demand that listeners confront ambiguity and decide where they stand. When someone presents a complex perspective, it forces others to think independently. Some resist that responsibility, preferring clear, uncomplicated answers. Ambiguity doesn't invent division, it simply exposes the variety of ways people respond. Kierkegaard recognized this tension and acted on it, rejecting Hegelian systems that claim to encompass all of existence. In Either Or, he shows how two life views, the aesthetic and the ethical, cannot be reconciled neatly. Highlighting nuance often leads to discomfort. Some accuse the speaker of indecision, while others are prompted to reconsider their own choices. Consider the everyday impact. Telling someone life is complicated and requires personal commitment may unsettle them. They may have hoped for a straightforward doctrine to adopt without reflection. American politician Barney Frank once quipped, "Television is apparently the enemy of nuance, but nuance is essential for a thoughtful discussion." Kierkegaard would agree. Forcing a single, oversimplified answer cheats people of the responsibility to make their own choices. Nuance doesn't dilute truth, it exposes how differently individuals approach it. For Kierkegaard, the thinker acts like a mirror. By reflecting the complexity of life, some see themselves clearly, while others recoil. His writings were designed to challenge rather than to reconcile, to show the diversity of inward experience rather than create a false sense of consensus. In his view, nuance does not create division. It simply illuminates differences that existed all along, separating those willing to engage deeply from those satisfied with superficial clarity. Kierkegaard illustrates the limits of explanation through the story of Abraham and Isaac in Fear and Trembling. When Abraham is commanded by God to sacrifice his son, we witness the precise instant where reasoning collapses. Any attempt to rationalize his actions immediately confronts a paradox. If Abraham says, "I obeyed God's command," an objective observer responds, "But killing your son is wrong. How can this be justified?" At that point, any explanation seems to fail. Appealing to duty contradicts universal ethics. Appealing to love for God appears irrational. As Kierkegaard puts it, Abraham cannot speak, because he says that which would explain everything. That is, so it is understandable, that it is an ordeal such that the ethical is the temptation. In other words, spelling out his faith in words would undo it. The failure is stark. Reason demands justification, yet a leap of faith offers none. If Abraham tries to defend his action, he risks sounding immoral. By human standards, he appears to commit filicide. He may seem insane. No rational mind can comprehend the divine demand. Kierkegaard argues that any attempt to explain would render Abraham absurd, wicked, or mad. None of these preserves the sacredness of his commitment. The only path that remains is silence and obedience. Abraham's stance is effectively, I do not understand, I only trust. As Johannes, Kierkegaard's narrator, reflects, I understand only that I do not understand Abraham. Language reaches its boundary. Beyond it, we can only observe and marvel. This story demonstrates that there is a precise moment when explaining an inner commitment or existential act becomes impossible. Reason asks for proof, but some choices exist solely in the realm of dedication or faith. When words fail, Kierkegaard turns to silence, not as mere withdrawal, but as a deliberate and ethical stance. He argued that silence can protect the integrity of truth and preserve the depth of inward experience. He even joked, if I were a physician, I would prescribe silence as a remedy for the modern world, where constant chatter, opinions, and explanations often drown out what truly matters. He asked rhetorically, even if the word of God were proclaimed in the modern world, how could one hear it with so much noise? His point was clear. Over-talking can make us deaf to the most profound realities, and the antidote is to cultivate silence. Silence functions as a safeguard. When we over-explain or try to exhibit our experiences, the original meaning can be diluted or misunderstood. Consider someone who has undergone a mystical or transformative moment. Repeatedly describing it may reduce its impact, distort it, or simply bore listeners. Kierkegaard suggests that some truths are best held inwardly, shared only when circumstances allow. Silence preserves freshness, authenticity, and dignity. It also becomes an invitation. By withholding explanation, we give others the space to engage, reflect, and arrive at understanding on their own. Philosophers like Joseph Pieper emphasize that silence allows the soul to respond to reality without interference. True comprehension often arises not from words, but from the space in which words are absent. Kierkegaard practiced this in his indirect style, deliberately leaving paradoxes unresolved so readers could wrestle with them personally. Silence is an acknowledgement of limits. Kierkegaard recognized that not everything can, or should, be rationalized or displayed. Silence becomes a form of strength. It refuses to dilute meaning, avoids misinterpretation, and resists the temptation to perform for approval. Choosing silence is also an act of courage. It places conviction, faith, or love above the shallow demands of social expectation or superficial understanding. Our era, Kierkegaard warned in the present age, is full of reflection without passion, endless noise that produces little real insight. By remaining silent, the thoughtful individual preserves the sacredness of inner truth and refuses to submit it to public spectacle. Ultimately, silence can speak louder than words. For those who have reached the limits of explanation, silence is not absence. It is the space in which truth lives. As Kierkegaard reminds us, it is not what you say, but what you keep within that gives life to the soul.